Hi everybody and welcome. Today we are talking about how the UK attracts excellence in health. Excuse me. My name's James. I'm an anaesthetics and intensive care doctor by background. I practiced clinically for 5 years. I've done lots of different things in leadership, policy, innovation in the NHS. I've run a couple of different health tech accelerators, and now I'm the co-founder and CEO of SomX, which is a health tech and biotech specific communications agency. I'm going to give my panellists the chance to introduce themselves. So, over to yourself.
Okay, I'm in Newington. I head of special projects in the NIHR's innovations team, National Institute of Health and Care Research in the UK. I'm a chemist by background. Prior to this job, which I've been in for 8 years, looking after basically UK funding from the Department of Health and NHS England for innovations in the MedTech space, particularly in the team I'm in. I work for GE Healthcare in diagnostic imaging development. So.
I'm Chris Hopkins. I'm a consultant clinical scientist by background. Spent just over 28 years in the NHS, specifically working with MedTech companies to really drive research and innovation opportunities. Currently, I've got 2 hats really. I work half of my time in the University of Wales, on various research projects, and I also work within the NHS then, and I head up the Tritech Institute within Hywel University Health Board, which is in, I would say, sunny South Wales, but unfortunately it's very rainy South Wales at the moment.
Hi, I'm Linda Magee, and I'm a specialist in the UK Government's Department for International Trade. I work particularly in health innovation and the NHS, supporting companies, our teams around the world, and our businesses in the UK, both on investment but also on export. And I'm a life scientist by background, but I've spent quite a lot of my time helping small companies in bioincubation, and also latterly in the NHS in commercialisation and the adoption of innovation.
Awesome. So, I think attracting excellence in health for the UK, it's an interesting one, isn't it? 'Cause it's a funny time in the world, in the UK, post-Brexit and everything going on economically. There's so much that this could actually mean. So when you guys think about the UK and excellence in health, what do you each think about this from the positions that you are in? Does this mean fostering innovation from within the UK? Does this mean looking for talent outside the UK? Does this mean looking for ideas outside and bringing them over? What does that mean to each of you?
Probably both, all of those. So I guess from our perspective, one of the things that occurred to me was thinking about that is actually about there's a degree of excellence in execution of what we do. Yeah. One of the things that the NIHR has as its kind of focus is to try and fund the best people doing the best science in the best places. And so that's a lot of high quality is a key issue for us, making sure that happens. And I think just a couple of things that came to my mind. Fortunately, I was interestingly involved in one of the projects during the pandemic. One of the things that we did incredibly well, and we probably think more than anybody else, was the genome sequencing of the pathogen. And the reason we were able to do that was because of a long-term investment in genomic research in pathogens, and we'd funded that project. And what became the initial UK COG, as it was called, for the genome sequencing, was actually a project that was funded by the department and Wellcome. They happened to have everything all set up and ready to go. The project was still going on, and overnight they just, Professor Sharon Peacock, who was leading that project, just turned over the whole system and phoned everybody up and said, tomorrow we start sequencing COVID, because everything was in place to do that. And I think there's an element of that of excellence of forethought then as well, thinking about how you invest in stuff which you may not know is going to be important, but it sets up an infrastructure which allows you to do stuff.
All of the above again. You know, to be fair to the UK, I think we're pretty good at on the research and sort of design and development aspects. We need a regulatory framework within the UK that's fit for purpose, and I think we're already seeing a number of fundamental changes with MHRA, our regulator. You can see that in their delivery plan for the next few years, that they really want to push the innovation and science agenda within the UK, which is great. But I suppose there's more work to be done on the scale and the adoption aspect, if I'm honest. You know, it's quite frustrating sometimes when you work on quite exciting sort of projects that you know are going to have enormous impact on our patients, and we're not quite scaling that quick enough and adopting that technology quick enough. So there's definitely a lot of work to do there. But again, there are changes afoot around the procurement sort of rulings within the UK, and I think that will fundamentally change over the next few years.
When you say that the scale and adoption bit is the hardest bit, on a really practical level, if you could do one thing that would actually improve that, what would it be?
When we established the Tritech Institute 2 years ago, and we undertake clinical trials, clinical investigations, but we do a lot of evaluation work. And for me, we've got various centres across the UK that do evaluations. But as a commercial partner, you could go to the northeast of England, for example, and do an evaluation, and then you go down to London and they ask you to do another evaluation. It's bringing all of that together. So we've got an acceptance that once we've done an evaluation and we cover a common theme through that evaluation, that should be accepted throughout the UK for me, really. Yeah, that's the fundamental shift for me.
And I think, again, all of the above that you said at the beginning, James, I've got a slightly different aspect because I'm very focused on businesses. So I think for me, it's seeing thriving businesses, both born in the UK, if you like, but also coming in from outside, and the partnership between the NHS, our academic community, charities. I mean, they don't fund business, but they're a very important part of what we do in the patient voice. Ian mentioned Wellcome earlier, you know, huge contribution. And I think in terms of the adoption piece, you know, we are getting there. We make quite a lot of strides now with the accelerated access collaboration, which we have, which is bringing all those groups together, and the regulators, of course, and our assessors, NICE. So bringing that whole community that can use levers and whatever they need to do to ensure the best innovation is adopted.
So when we talk about, when we talk about attracting excellence into the UK, let's say we had a huge swell of really innovative companies ready to go. We had a huge amount of talent that came in, ready to work, ready to go. Would we, as the UK, be ready to deal with that? Do we have the right system? Do we have the right infrastructure? Do we have everything in place to support that if we were to do this amazing thing and bring all this innovation in?
Well, Linda can probably answer that better than that, but I think because we're involved in helping startups and innovators in the NHS and in some of the universities, so it's mostly what I deal with is fairly early stage from proof of concept kind of onwards in terms of developing their MedTech. One of the things that's very clear is that the difficulty around the regulatory, the uncertainty around the regulatory, particularly in the UK at the moment, which is causing lots of people to go other places where they know it's more certain, in particular the US. And that's true of all the other funders as well. We're talking between all the funders. So I think that's a key thing that needs to be get sorted out as quickly as possible. And the industry bodies like the ABHI, who support small companies in health tech industry, are lobbying the government almost on a daily basis to try and get this sorted out. We have to make a decision and get some certainty back into that, because that's a real problem in the industry, I would say, at the moment.
You're right, Ian, but we do need that clarification. It's clearly an issue for companies, but I think we have a lot of support. I mean, DIT, we support new companies coming in. We do work with large and small companies. We have the Global Entrepreneurs Programme, which is particularly geared to helping entrepreneurs and small startup companies who want to come into the UK. And I think through our various sort of regional hubs, and this is something maybe Chris speaks to as well, there's a lot of support that could come in around particular locations that you can choose to go to.
I'd agree 100% with that. I mentioned earlier I've been in the NHS for 27, 28 years, and years ago when I talked about collaboration and collaboration with commercial partners in particular, I was called a maverick at the time because it's like you can't, public sector can't speak to, can't work in collaborations. Thankfully, we've seen a seismic shift in that, and we've learned some fundamental lessons during the pandemic as well, where you've got this multi-sector sort of partnership and true partnership, where you work together to try and solve these complex sort of health issues. It's fundamental for me going forward. I can speak from a Wales perspective. We've got a Life Science Hub that bring all of the different sort of skill sets together across Wales. So there's one point of contact. So as a commercial partner, for example, you can head into Life Science Hub and they will direct you, across Wales as a community. And we've been working really hard on that because even within Wales a few years ago, we were quite insular with our, we've always worked really well with our university partners, and there are good excellent collaborations there, but it was still quite separate as a geography, whereas, the establishment of the Life Science Hub has really brought that together now into what I'd call a sort of a cohesive sort of community and an ecosystem really for MedTech development. And there are similar examples of that across England and Scotland and Ireland as well.
Yeah. And worth also saying that from a funder's perspective, there's lots of opportunities to help signpost. So for the NIHR, which is actually the biggest health and care funder in Europe, actually, with a budget, in terms of budget-wise, we fund probably about 25,000 people or so in England. Our colleagues downstairs, if you want to go and talk to them on stand BR20, well, I had to mention that, so I better put that in, plug that in. But one of the things we do for both UK and companies that are interested in coming to the UK is we can do a lot of connections with expertise in the NHS who are also researchers and help them to connect people up to understand if you're coming into the UK, what part of that. So part of the things that that's one of the reasons why we work with DIT quite a lot as well, where companies want to come and understand what the NHS needs. We can connect them up with some people who understand that and can help them. And potentially, because we're UK government funding, most of that means it has to go primarily to a UK organisation, at least as the lead organisation. They can also act potentially as a lead person for attracting some grant funding in the UK.
Ian, before you mentioned that bottleneck of regulation being a real kind of barrier to a volume of potential innovation that's just sat behind in this queue, waiting to get going, waiting to get to market. Post-Brexit, does this really put a bit of pressure on the UK to not only solve that problem, but actually when you think about everything else and all the other bottlenecks of lack of free movement, all that sort of stuff, and the programs that were European that are now having to be UK, is there a lot more pressure to foster from the UK now rather than bringing in from abroad? Or is there still, and should there still be a focus on bringing in from abroad as well? Thinking both.
I think that there's clearly an expectation. I mean, we're not short of people with great ideas, whether they're from the NHS entrepreneurs, universities, and certainly in our startup arena in the MedTech space. There's no shortage of fantastic ideas, but I think you're right. It puts some extra pressure on the UK ecosystem to get out beyond that. And I think one of the key things that we're trying to do, and I think is incumbent on us to do, is to help people to get their technologies out of the UK as well as bringing people in. And I think we need both. And the NHS very clearly is looking for solutions to problems. They're not necessarily concerned about where they come from. And I think the key thing is to find the right solution for the problems they're dealing with. So we need to do both, absolutely.
I think also for our regulatory system and our assessment system, it is now the opportunity to develop, the best system, which of course is completely focused. Priority must be on patient safety, but it can be agile. We can develop new things. We've already started doing it with the pharmaceutical side with some of our innovative licensing programs, and I think if we can see that develop in MedTech, that would be very valuable.
I think, if you'd spoken to me a few months ago, particularly around the regulatory sort of frameworks, then I would agree 100%. I think we're at a point now where, you know, we've finished the consultation exercise with MHRA regulators. I think we're quite certain that the regulatory framework will align to be very similar to MDR in Europe. 95% of probably the UK regulatory framework will be quite similar. So that gives me a lot more assurance. It should give our commercial partners a lot more assurance as well that they don't have to work through a completely different regulatory framework. So it's just allowing the regulators to work through that now to get that into place as soon as possible. So I think short term, yes, there's a problem. Long term, if they align to the delivery plan that they've already published, I think it'll be quite an exciting time for the UK, if I'm honest.
Worth saying perhaps something about NICE as well, because again, post that regulatory approval piece is usually that means you still have to generate some evidence that, and we've talked about pilots all over the place. I think Chris mentioned that before. So clearly we need to resolve that issue, and there are some things in place. We're doing some things in terms of the NIHR's I4I program, SBRI, Healthcare. Innovate UK are doing things with their funding opportunities to try and resolve that issue, working with academic health science networks and other teams like Chris's team to try and resolve that problem so that you do the right thing. And also getting to the innovators earlier enough. It was mentioned in the last session actually about thinking about these things early so that you build that thought in and you make sure that you address the issues right from the beginning. So when you're building your clinical trial protocol, and what you're thinking about, you're actually thinking about all of that stuff right up front. The other thing to think about is NICE, which is the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. I think it's now the same acronym, different name as it used to be. But these are the guys that provide the evaluation of technologies, whether it's medicines or MedTech. And they will, if you're assessed positively, you can get your technology written into guidance, which means that in theory, clinicians should be using that technology, or they're being told this is the right technology to use. Now, they're starting to do some interesting things as well on the back of early value assessments, because typically that can be quite a long process to demonstrate to them in an independent way that you've got evidence of how well it works and that it's actually worth doing. So economics around that is important. They're now starting to do something called early value assessment, which is very similar to what they've been doing in medicines for some time. In the MedTech space. So there's a pilot going on at the moment, which is looking quite promising. So we're looking to try and work with them to see whether we can push things through into that route. So I think there's some opportunities coming which will allow the technologies to get used in real settings at an earlier stage perhaps, and then continue to collect the data as they're being used, which will then get to the point where they would perhaps later have been with more formal guidance.
There's a lot of kind of all of the above answers here, isn't it? There's quite a lot of, whether it's regulatory, whether it's economics, whether it's evidence, we seem to need everything to be working here without any bottlenecks. And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Especially with, as we say, things like Brexit and economies and everything going on. It's how do we get everything going at the same time? One of the big enablers here is funding. And so I wonder, with where we are politically and everything, with what we have in the UK, we have SEIS, we have a very strong VC network, we have Innovate and other grant funding mechanisms. Can the UK be a European or global force with funding? Can funding be one of the things we can say we're really good at?
It can. I mean, we are already #1 in Europe in terms of our life science funding, and I think, again, there's lots of focus here on digital health. I think the largest number of funded startups in digital health started in the UK, but we do have to keep that going. We had a competition recently within DIT, which was really geared to support those companies who are wanting to export. It's my privilege to speak to about 30 diagnostic companies, and a very significant number of them had CEOs from Europe, Asia, the US, or founders, and it was a combination of IP that they brought in from their home country, if you like, and were now set up. Many of them have been to university in the UK, because we just have an excellent university system. So I think if we have those talented people, both commercial and sort of scientific, and we can support them with funding such as Innovate UK or some of the schemes that Ian runs with NIHR, that's very powerful, and we just need to keep doing that well.
From a practical viewpoint, you know, we work with all manner of startups, SMEs, multinationals. I prefer, if I'm honest, I prefer working with startups. It's a lot more flexible. Things happen a lot more quickly on both aspects. And, you know, regularly we'll come across a funding issue where maybe, you know, the startup doesn't have funding, doesn't have enough capital back in, so we'll maybe use a grant sort of option, or there are, you know, numerous options where we can, you know, particularly if the idea is right, and we share the same vision. That's the important thing as well. Linda mentioned this. At the end of the day, all of this is for our patients and for the benefit of our patients. So if we, you know, I appreciate commercial partners obviously, you know, need to make money as a result of anything they do, but we need to have that common vision and that common purpose, which is ultimately, you know, for the benefit of our patients. And there are all sorts of opportunities that we sort of churn through on a regular, weekly basis, really. One grant opportunity might close, another might open, or sometimes we manage to find we've got different sort of partners within Wales where we can speak to sort of capital funders as well, where we can bring some of those opportunities in as well. So yeah.
There's plenty of funding. I think funding in some ways, from what I'm seeing, sitting here, and I'm sitting here as someone is part of a team that does a lot of funding in the MedTech space. Actually, that isn't the whole story by any means. And I think one of the other pieces is the collaborations, having the right people together, and making those matches, which is an equally important part of it, to make sure that people are actually thinking about the right things, they've got the right expertise, they've got the right partners, they've got the right champions in the clinical space especially that can help them develop, particularly the startup companies. So all of those pieces together are really important. So that's one of the reasons why we're here from NIHR, particularly, and why we've got a couple of people downstairs, just because that's one of the key things that we do as well.
There are plenty of reasons to be positive, and I know we're running out of time very quickly here, but can you guys share with me one thing either that you're working on or something that you're part of that makes you optimistic about what's going on here? Something practical that you're part of that gives us a flavour of A, what you guys do, but B, why it's so important for us and why we should be optimistic about attracting excellence. I was going to mention a company that we're funding, and the reason we're funding them. So the NHS England Cancer team have been looking for technologies that are late stage, so trying to address some of that stuff that Chris was talking about, how we get things into the system. It's really encouraging that they've got some very aggressive targets as part of the long-term plan to increase the diagnosis of cancer at stages 1 and 2 relative to 3 and 4. We funded some really interesting technologies and some companies. One of them is called Pinpoint Data Science, and effectively it combines a standard blood test with a load of biomarkers that you're measuring as routinely from simple blood draw with an AI algorithm that does a prediction of the likelihood of cancer, and it's tweaked for each of our 2-week wait different cancer pathways. They've got a fantastic bit of technology. It looks really good. Getting it into the system, getting evidence of how well it works in the system is the challenge, which we're trying to address with this. And what is really exciting is to see that the way that the NHS are being much more flexible about the way that they're going about that, and they're thinking about different ways of doing it. So I'm quite excited about the way that some of this approaches, and we're beginning to see that in other areas, including with the AI program that was before. So there's lots of new things being looked at as ways of making that happen. So I'm quite optimistic about that.
I'm on cancer and AI again. We've got a number of projects in the pipeline. The one I'm probably more excited about is we're looking at the prostate cancer pathway. So you imagine as a gentleman of a particular age, you'll have a PSA test, prostate-specific antigen test, and then if that PSA is raised, you'll have an MRI, and then depending on the outcome of the MRI, you will go for biopsy. So we're working on the MRI stage at the moment with a company called 𝐂𝐨𝐬𝐧. Fantastic company to work with, really flexible, and we've got the sensitivity levels up to a really good level now, so we're working through the specificity levels, so those non-cancers at the moment. That will completely, I think, change that prostate cancer pathway, because lots of patients at the moment, because the diagnostic element of MRI and looking at a prostate cancer is a very small image, if there's any doubt, they refer them on to biopsy, which means that a lot of these patients are getting inappropriate biopsies. And there are obviously risks with those biopsies as well. We're working on that MRI stage, and there's another company who are already working on the biopsy stage. So you can see that sort of that pathway in the future changing considerably. So that diagnostic element for gentlemen of a particular age hopefully will improve considerably. So yeah, I'm quite excited over that one.
I can't talk about specific health-related projects like my colleagues, but I think from DIT's perspective, we've literally just launched a MedTech offer, which is really showcasing a number of our companies in the UK. From around, with bringing things from around the world frequently. And also we have what we call Digital Health Playbook, which I know James will be familiar with. And I think it's now in its third iteration. And again, this is a showcase of the digital health companies with very wide-ranging, but it shows you what we have got in the UK, what's grown in the UK. The vast majority are used in the NHS, so that's part of the quality stamp, if you like. And I think that's, as well as welcoming companies into the UK, we then want to help them to grow once they're there. So I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Thank you so much to all of my panellists. Plenty to be optimistic about, plenty of activity. I look forward to seeing it happen. Thank you.